Welcome to the Block and Tackle Show, hosted by Carl Block. Carl is a partner in the law firm of Loeb & Loeb here in Los Angeles, California. He will be tackling some of the biggest issues in business today. Listen, learn, and enjoy as he leaves no stone unturned during deep conversations with some of today's most amazing business leaders. Welcome to the show.
So now you've got the streaming service that you found a market that nobody else really thought about getting in. And along comes a semi-big conglomerate in Spanish language television and broadcasting. And I don't know whether you contacted them or the light bulb went on over their head saying, hey, there's this gringo who has this massive streaming service. He's rolled up a bunch of companies in streaming, Spanish language content. I assume mostly, targeted towards Mexican audiences. We don't have it. Like a lot of big companies, they often think, I don't think we can recreate this, but we can buy it. And so one way or another, you guys get in touch. And then, did they understand it at first? Were they really, really excited about it? Did they not know? Did they have dissonance and that they didn't, think of it themselves at first? How did that go?
Yes to all the above. Well, and you make it seem like I was a one-man band as that gringo. I was clearly not, right? I took on partners at various times. Probably the most prominent of which was my partner Rafael Urbina, who had been the founder of the VIX social media business. And so we sat one night. We'd just gotten to know each other kind of through the industry and through mutual friends, and we sat one night at an outdoor restaurant in Santa Monica and kind of sketched out on a cocktail napkin how it seemed like we could kind of like create this funnel, like what I was talking about earlier, and ultimately decided to combine our businesses. And so luckily Rafa speaks Spanish and grew up in Venezuela and is based in Miami. And so he brought a little bit of, I guess, Latino street cred to my gringo-ness, but I surely didn't do it alone. And we were good partners because we actually were really good at different things. So he was based in Miami, I was based in LA. We had offices in Miami, LA, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Mexico City, and New York. And so we could kind of split up the country, and we could split up the responsibilities. And so he was really good at a lot of the social media stuff. Not surprisingly, I was really good at the content stuff, and that combination worked out really well. And so there sort of became a moment. We always intended that we would, combine our assets to try to sell it, because we felt like that. I felt like I was too small to sell on my own. He was too small to sell on his own. But together, we would kind of inorganically create some scale, and that would probably get the attention of some of the bigger players. And then right after that, we got really lucky, which is always a good thing. Probably more important to be lucky than good. And it was the pandemic, and everybody was stuck at home with nothing to do but watch movies and TV shows. And so our streaming service went like this, and we were also sort of right at this moment where we had been a subscription service. And then we decided to open it up to advertising as well. And that was kind of a novel thing at the time. Oddly, it's sort of come full circle because it sounds like television when you hear it out loud. But, it was right at the time when Pluto and Tubi and some of the Amazon had launched a ad-supported service called Freebie. And so people were just kind of starting to get into this concept of watching streaming TV shows and movies with ads. And so we made that available for people. We made subscriptions available for people if they want to pay for it and get rid of the ads. And then we got the benefit of the pandemic. And so literally we went like this in terms of viewership. And that was really, really helpful. In fact, it's weird. It caused a whole bunch of unexpected problems. We were like, oh my gosh, this is growing so fast. We need to invest more in marketing. And then we're like, but gosh, we didn't budget for that. And we got to, come up. So we felt certain that we would get to a place where we could really go out and sell. So we ultimately, we ran a process. We hired a banker, we ran a process. We did it during the middle of the pandemic. We ended up, when we sold it to Univision, we basically never did any in-person diligence, which is super weird. And and so what was happening, also being lucky, what was happening at Univision is that Univision had just been bought by a new ownership group. It was the guys from a big private equity fund called Searchlight, and that was kind of led by a guy named Wade Davis, who had been the CFO at Viacom and left and kind of got together with the Searchlight guys, and they identified Univision as an interesting asset. They thought it was really undervalued. So they bought it. And when they got in there, I think they realized that there had been a lot of deferred maintenance over the years, and that they thought they had a streaming strategy. And really what they had was a really good strategy in a PowerPoint with like one guy, with a digital title. And that was kind of it. And so they talked about launching their own streaming service. But that was kind of still on the drawing board. And, we were in the market, and we were there, and we had eyeballs, and we had ad revenue, and we had ads, and, it was all the stuff that they wanted. And so they acquired us. And then the second thing we did together was identified Televisa, which is the largest Spanish language, or the largest media company in Latin America, and then ultimately merged those assets. That was about a $5 billion transaction. And so together that made us the largest Spanish language media company in the world. And so we really ended up finding the right home, quite frankly, for VIX, and give you a sense for scale of VIX. So VIX has about 75,000 hours of content today,
Wow.
which is a lot. We as a company own 92 sound stages throughout Mexico. We produce about 7,000 hours of original content for VIX every year. We're the largest producer of live soccer on the planet. We control about 65% of the soccer viewing in the US, regardless of language, actually.
That's incredible.
It's crazy. Last year we were Apple's TV App of the Year, which is the first time a Spanish language app had ever won kind of Apple's top global honor. So, lots of scale. We've, invested a lot in a lot of outdoor marketing and a lot of other type of marketing. And so now that it's, on your radar, you'll see it around. You don't appear to be my target market, Carl, but nonetheless, it's you'll see the big orange letters around. It's kind of fun to see it on buildings and billboards and bus stops and that kind of stuff. So it's out there, and it was interesting. And so then we when we went into kind of brought this asset into kind of the mothership of now TelevisaUnivision. That was a whole different experience. I was really hoping that they would buy us and fire me. But they didn't see it that way. And so it was interesting because, we went from being, guys that really controlled our own decision-making to having to figure out kind of the difference between an independent movie and a studio movie. Like we kind of had to figure out how to do this. And so we spent a lot of time with Wade Davis, who by that point was the CEO of TelevisaUnivision, Pierluigi Gasallo, who had come over with him from Viacom. And we bought a couple other streaming services, one called Blim, one called Pantaya, kind of rolled all those together into VIX. So it was a really different experience. This time we had billions of dollars to spend, so that was pretty cool. But a very, very different experience, and one that I loved actually. It was unexpectedly a really fantastic experience that I didn't expect to have.
Something, it's a great story. I would say to you, they didn't fire you because the guy with the PowerPoint and the spreadsheet didn't know how to run a company. But he was probably good, with apologies. He was good at coming up with ideas and doing PowerPoints and spreadsheets, but you have the operator's curse. And I was mentioning earlier, Clint and Rich Williams, who have done very similar paths in different industries. And it's the same thing. If you are an operator, the amazing operator that gets to the top of the company, they are worth their weight in gold, platinum, whatever you want, Bitcoin, whatever you want to call it. That very hard to find amazing operators, and especially operators who can integrate businesses. That's not an easy feat. So
you're right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, the integration part is really interesting too, because I think we got really good at integrating businesses. So we would source businesses well, make fast deals, get them integrated fast. There's a whole art, in that. And so I agree that turned out to actually be something that was a real value add.
And good for you. I mean, it really is incredible. I don't know how much you're doing for them day to day now, but it's amazing that you are a pioneer in the Spanish language streaming. It's really impressive, and kudos to your partner too.
Yeah, no, look, it's all. It was a fun journey. I've been gone from Univision for about a year, and I think technically I'm still an advisor, but but that just kind of means they can call me and ask me stuff guilt-free, I think. And I'm very much rooting on them, and always, sometimes I'm able to help them with stuff, but it's been great. I mean, look, the reason I would have stuck around, I left for a few reasons. Probably the biggest of which is I was really missing the CEO chair. I mean, I loved having the experience of working within a really big company because I'd never really had that before. But ultimately I'm kind of miscast there, and I was missing the CEO chair, and that job wasn't going to become available anytime soon at Univision. The other reason is that for me to really do the stuff I would want to do at Univision, continue all the stuff that I enjoyed there, I really needed to be sitting in the same office as my boss, who was the CEO, and he's based in Miami, and my wife's family lives in Miami, or near it, and that's way too close for her, so I would have had to get a new wife, so that'd be a problem. So I left, and then I had to figure out what I wanted to do next.
I get it. No trading wives for draft choices. That's not okay. And I don't know who Dallas drafted.
It's not a good policy in general.
No, for sure. So obviously, entertainment, does have some AI aspects to it. But you go to Miso Robotics. How did you find that gig? And I'm sure you invested, but tell me what piqued your interest about that and how you got involved.
Yeah, well, so yes, I'm running this company called Miso Robotics. It's been around for about 7 years, and it kind of started the food technology space. They launched a burger flipping robot named Flippy about 5 or 6 years ago, and then very quickly realized that the far larger opportunity was to automate the fry station, so making French fries and onion rings and chicken nuggets and so forth. And then they continued to make other robots. So there's a drink making robot named Sippy, and a coffee making robot named Drippy, and a tortilla chip making robot called Chippy, and you get the gist of how this.
No, I do. Your marketing people are like, how many other names rhyme with all this? We gotta Google this or use ChatGPT to come up with all the rhyming names. Hey, Rich, this is what we need to get into. It rhymes with Drippy and Sippy and Flippy. So, but go on.
Indeed, we do have a very specific naming convention. So I don't know how we would do anything that didn't fall within that convention for sure. But no, I had been an early investor in the company. So as one of those 30 investments I made, however many years ago when I was an investor for my own account, that was one of the companies. And so, and I had a couple of different verticals that I invested in, and one was what I called future tech. So it was things that were going to be highly disruptive, and they were going to either be grand slam home runs or they were going to go to zero. But there really was never going to be any in between. So those are companies like SpaceX, or Miso was one of those. And so I. And I love being in the ground floor of those types of companies.
Sure.
I think the SpaceX one will probably work out for us. The Miso, I guess we'll still see how that's going to work. But so I'd have kind of a front row seat, or maybe a second row seat, to kind of watch the company's growth over the years. And and look, I've been running kind of growth stage media and technology companies now for 25 years, and so. I reconnected with the guys at Miso and the board, and was really just kind of checking in with them to see what was going on. And And they said that the founders had really done a great job of getting the business to sort of the point that it was. And they really pulled off something miraculous, which is creating, something from nothing, a product from scratch.
Sure.
But as is often the case, scaling a company is a different skill set than, starting a company. And so they really needed somebody to come in and, kind of take it to the next level. And that's what I like to do. And so at first I was like, no, I'm a media guy. I don't know anything about robots. And then I went over and I checked it out, and I was so blown away by it. We have this giant robot lab in the kind of shadow of Caltech, and you walk in there and you meet all these robots, and it's very futuristic. And everybody today is talking about AI, but this is a company that's been writing code for AI for 6 years now, and people were so smart and interesting and had so much stuff to say, and they failed all the time, like we were talking about earlier, and yet sometimes they succeeded, and that was really interesting. And when I looked at it, a lot of it felt very familiar. So, if you think about VIX, on the surface, it sounds like a content business, and there's a lot of truth to that. But it's also a technology and a data business. And so Miso is a technology company, and we built the tech stack from scratch that you need to stream video, and that's not for the faint of heart. And that scaled pretty well. And so, and Miso's done something similar, right? They started a technology platform that was small, and now it's getting bigger. It's also, Flippy is a giant data gathering machine. And so I thought that was interesting, because at VIX, that's what we do. We gather more data really than anyone on the planet about how Spanish speakers consume content, what devices, when, what time of day, how, where they are, what the content that they watch. And we, got really good at looking at that data, using it to make better decisions, finding ways to monetize it, both to our clients and beyond that. And Miso has the same opportunity. And so all of that felt very familiar. And then I'd say that the space feels very familiar too. In the early days of streaming, like, it was really fragmented. And as I said earlier, nobody was making any money. And that's kind of where food technology is today. But there's a lot of stuff happening in the bigger world that is forcing that to change. Like the front of the house of restaurants innovated about 15 or 20 years ago. That's when you saw the introduction of open table and online reservations and point of sale systems. And the back of the house has always been the same. But today, restaurants have a really, really hard time finding people to work in the back of the house, because a lot of the jobs are not super desirable, and they're kind of dangerous. And the fry station is like paramount to those, because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what I'd like to do today? I'd like to burn my arms and smell like grease all day. No, there's a lot of other jobs they would gladly do in a restaurant, from washing dishes to the front of the house to you name it. But like, the fry station is not one that anybody truly loves. So restaurants are having a hard time finding those people. And, today there are 9 million open jobs in the US, and there's only 6 million people looking. So even if we had 100% employment, there would still be a shortage of workers. And the restaurant industry is the biggest employer in the US. So they're more impacted by this than any other industry. They're 2x what the number 2 is, which is schools. And so you add one more layer to that, though, which is labor costs. So now you've got labor scarcity and you've got labor costs. And in California, we just went to $20 an hour minimum wage just this year. And the economics just don't make sense. So restaurants run on a very thin margin. And so if they can't hire enough people to work in the kitchen, and the people that they do hire cost far too much, many restaurants are just saying, you know what, I'm done. I'm closing my doors. I'm out of here. And now that's causing a lot of restaurant jobs to just go away.
Something.
I'm trying to save the restaurant business and save all those jobs.
Yeah, so there's a lot. You are a content-rich guest, so no pun intended. So let me first talk about the data aspect of what you're doing. I think when a lot of people talk about robotics, they don't really appreciate the data angle and how much data you can get and how you can analyze that, which helps you refine your products and provide things to people about how they're running their business that they don't know. Again, a little bit hidden where they ain't. There's a plenty of people in the robotics business who aren't focused on data. And so I assume that when you're getting all that data, you can actually help a restaurant business figure out what they can do to save costs, how they can be more efficient, how it will affect their price point, how maybe even procurement. So it seems like there's a lot there that you can do by collecting that data.
It's true. I mean, what we're building is really a data business, if you think about it.
Sure.
And in a world where, and data means more today than proprietary data. It means more today than it ever has. Like the New York Times is suing ChatGPT and others to basically say you can't train up your generative AI on our proprietary data. And so people are building these firewalls essentially around the data that they own, and they're like, that's mine. And so Miso has that. We have, we've conducted more live experiments and tests in commercial kitchens than anyone in the industry, period. Flippy has been operating like more than 150,000 hours in live commercial kitchens.
That's incredible.
And that's like 17 years worth of data. And it's funny, and we were talking earlier about failure. Like we fail all the time because we're kind of the first mover. In fact, I really wish we weren't. We probably have a 18 to 24 month first mover advantage that may not last forever. But the reality of it is, I kind of wish we weren't, because we're forced to make all the mistakes and then everybody copies us. I wish it was the opposite. I'd rather be a fast follower, let someone else make all the mistakes, and we'll just copy all the stuff they do right. And so consequently, we fail a lot. We have the Miso Innovation Lab, which is our little sandbox where we try new stuff and work with existing and potential clients to create things that are custom built for them, automation, AI, and that kind of stuff. And within there, most of the stuff we do fails and will fail. But as things get in there and find a product market fit and really start to spring to life, then we'll build a business around it like we've done with Flippy. And so yeah, it's fun. And the AI part of it's really cool too, because, like Flippy is architected around a robot arm, but a robot arm is just a robot arm. Like it's the AI that makes it really, special. It's kind of the secret sauce. And Flippy gets smarter as he goes. He's constantly making a series of like millisecond math decisions to try to figure out how in the world am I going to cook all this stuff that I got to cook? Because the reality of it is he needs to be faster than humans. He needs to be cleaner than humans. He needs to get it 100% perfect every time. And he needs to cook it all on demand because right now there's massive problems with food waste in restaurants. And so if you can eliminate that, that's a massive cost savings. So Flippy brings not only cost savings around labor, food waste, and others, but also a whole lot of positive revenue impact as well. So increase others.
The other thing that we should bring up is when you have robotics in a kitchen, those jobs at the quote fry station, they're not always safe, and they're heating up oil very, very hot, and there are floors that are slippery, and people can get hurt. People can get hurt at fry stations. So insurance companies are probably saying, we actually appreciate the idea that you are, you're a force multiplier. Not only are you helping these businesses survive and to take jobs that are not glamorous, you're cutting down the risk profile from an injury and healthcare cost perspective that can help these thin margin businesses, and in turn is going to lower their insurance costs. So the secondary, tertiary effects and some of these unintended but very beneficial positive consequences of this stuff is really great. And as you say, there's a lot of people who would probably be rather doing better jobs within the restaurant than being, at some of the hardest jobs in the restaurant, the most physically demanding, the most prone to injury. And that's a win. The cities like restaurants. Restaurants do sales. Sales create taxes for counties, which money gets to the cities. They can create city taxes. That allows for municipal services. So all of these things that flow from a seeming, just idea of, hey, we've got this technology, it'll revolutionize it, things will be more efficient within the kitchen, but actually flow to all these, ancillary benefits. It's actually amazing when you think about it. And of course, the better you get at it, the more efficiencies, the easier it will be to have more restaurant food. There are people, as we know, less fortunate people, who that is often, sort of fast food, regrettably, but it is often a staple in their diets. And what would happen if that's not there? So, you may not get the gold medal from some people, but there are a heck of a lot of people who would benefit just from the idea like this. Of course, they got to deal with the rhyming names and all that stuff, but when you get past it, it's an amazing product. Now, I have to ask, because you're doing this and you're doing this at the fry station, what do you think the sort of market opportunities are just beyond fast food restaurants or, the like ice cream serving restaurants? Where do you see this going if it really, really, really hits?
Yeah, right now, sort of our sweet spot is the quick serve restaurant. So, we've announced publicly some of our customers, and so those are people like Jack in the Box and White Castle, and places like that, and they get a ton of benefit out of Flippy. But it's not just limited to them. You have to be doing a certain volume in order to justify putting in a robot. But the reality of it is, once you get to that volume, it can be a small chain. It can be a family business with 3 or 4 locations. It can be a single location restaurant with pretty good book of business. So it's not just really the big chains. It really is applicable to everyone. And I think your point is really well taken. Well, of course, I would expect the lawyer in you to go straight to the insurance aspect of it all. But I think the thing you point out, I think, is interesting around food and food accessibility, particularly for kind of certain socioeconomic groups. But also then there's the job part of that too, because working in the fry station, as an example, is like there's no real future in that. And so if you can take that person who would otherwise be working that kind of dead-end job and you can redeploy them to a different place in the restaurant, like maybe the front of the house, for instance, that can become a career. Like that can turn into being a salaried employee. You can get promoted to assistant general manager, district manager. Like that can be a legit career. And it's hard to support your family on minimum wage right now. And so, all of this stuff that we do is really built around improving the lives of restaurant workers, because that's what gets me up. I mean, even when I was in the movie business, I love telling stories that other people, weren't telling. That was really exciting for me, because I felt like I would make the world a better place. And I'm not sure I was ever going to make the world a better place by making teenage movies, but I always found ways to make things that I was passionate about.
Sure.
And that I felt like were leaving the world a better place. And so here, I'm not an engineer, so I don't really bring much value to the robot part of what we do. But I do enjoy getting up in the morning and thinking, oh, what we do improves lives of people's, the workers' lives. And that's a pretty cool mission. Like that I can really, really get behind. So we feel like we're saving the restaurant business and we're improving the lives of those workers. And, that's important. It's not just important for me too. I mean, there's an easier way to make a buck in the world than to work at a growth stage company. And so everybody that works at Miso also has to sort of be bought into the bigger mission of doing what we do to help people.
I just think it's important that you said that. And I think it's important for people to keep that in mind, because we have, I think in society, a natural distrust of disruption. And so we tend to look at disruption as a society, not necessarily entrepreneurs, but we tend to look at disruption as a negative thing without looking at the positives. And as we're talking about, there's just a lot of positives there. And not only just the sort of insurance side, the physical side, but whether it's degrading or depressing or causes you not to have motivation because you feel like you're trapped in that job. And now, you may have an opportunity to do something like you said in the front office and then elevate. That's a beautiful thing. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal just a couple of days ago. I think the CEOs of Home Depot and Walmart talked about that and talked about their elevation. I don't know if you saw it, but I think with apologies to both of those entities, your story actually is even more compelling because you're pulling them out of that, potentially lowest level job to begin with, to allow them right away to get into other jobs in other areas of the restaurant. So it is something that people should think about and not be so scared of what you're doing, and particularly because you're saving restaurants and allowing them to expand. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, and Miso sort of has this other element too. Like you mentioned, companies like Home Depot, and Miso's got this like sort of weird element that I think is worth sort of noting, because it kind of validates just the common sense of what we do. And it's one of the things I think makes Miso special. For a while, it freaked me out, but now I've realized that it's a real sort of feather in our cap, which is that Miso raised its early money from institutional venture investors like me and other LA-based funds, but then it became it somehow wandered into equity crowdfunding, which has now been around for about 15 years, and the concept with equity crowdfunding, it started with like Kickstarter. They help me fund my passion project, and I'll send you a T-shirt, and but now you can go out and you can sell shares in your company, and it started because in the Obama administration with the Jobs Act, they came to believe that the rich were only getting richer because they were getting access to deal flow that really most people didn't get. And so imagine being someone who had the opportunity to invest in a Facebook or a Google, before they went public. And so they said, all right, well, let's open that up to just people on Main Street, and let's make it so that anybody can invest. And they can invest little amounts. They can invest $1,000. They can invest $10,000, whatever the number is. But and so they opened that up, and then it became highly regulated by the SEC, and so it's sort of like having a mini public company, if you will.
Yes.
And which means everything is like super transparent, and you get fully audited, and it's a whole thing. But Miso has raised more than $100 million from equity crowdfunding alone, and that's 30,000 people that have sort of bought into the bigger mission, and they kind of act as this like army of word of mouth marketers, where people go around and they take pride in having a little bit of ownership in Flippy, and we're actually raising what I think is probably going to be our last equity crowdfunding round right now. I would be a bad CEO if I didn't say invest.misorobotics.com.
That's invest.miso.robotics.com.
It's minus one dot, so it's invest.misorobotics.com.
Okay, sorry.
But it's interesting. This is I don't know for sure, but this will probably be our last one before we graduate more to traditional institutional capital. But it's really fun. It really sort of gives a lot of weight to what we do. It gives a lot of validity to what we do. It's fun to do it on behalf of a lot of people. And everybody knows Flippy. In fact, when Flippy migrated from the flipping burgers, hence the name Flippy, over to the fry station, they tried to change the name to something fry related. And not only could they not come up with anything better, but by that point, Flippy had fan clubs and Instagram accounts and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of people that know Flippy, and some of that is just simply because of the equity crowdfunding thing. So it makes what we do. It's probably created, it's probably made Miso the most important brand in food technology, because there's just all these people out there that are kind of aware of it, and that makes what we do really, really fun and special.
That's obviously also disruptive and innovative, and that's great. Again, I don't know if when you first thought about doing the crowdfunding, how much you could leverage marketing by doing that, but that's great. You haven't said that Flippy's on dating apps yet, but I assume that'll happen at some point.
That's next. That's the sequel for sure. And look, I wish I could take credit for the equity crowdfunding. All of that was taking place long before I got there. But I think that I think it's the biggest success story in the history of equity crowdfunding in terms of amount of capital raised. If there are others, I don't know who they are. But I think it does validate, that there's a real need for this. And so, I think what we're doing is special and important.
That's amazing. So anything you want to talk about in terms of future challenges, how much further this can go besides restaurants? What's on your mind about any of that?
Well, I think for me, one of the reasons I took this job is because I like the organic growth part of what we do, growing Miso, growing Flippy, adding new products, all that stuff. I think there's probably a bigger opportunity to go and consolidate a very fragmented space. Um, there's also some companies that have been running their business where they sell appliances and products to restaurants, for the kitchens, that have not innovated in 50 or 60 years. They've been doing the exact same thing. And, I look at them and I think, man, that's kind of like the Blockbuster Video of this space, and that's not the guy you want to be. And so I think they're struggling to innovate. But I think that there's a lot of, smaller and mid-sized companies out there too, and that are in kind of this lane of restaurant innovation. And I think there's a big opportunity to go and roll those up, whatever that looks like. I just know that, to our point earlier, I think at VIX, we got really good at finding those companies, acquiring them through some kind of M&A transaction, integrating them fast. And, I think over the course of, 3, 4, 5 years, we've, consolidated 7 companies or so, maybe more. And so I think there's a similar opportunity here in this space too, because it feels very familiar to the early days of streaming for me. So that's the thing that I'm getting. I mean, that was kind of one of the main reasons I took this job, is because I thought that was going to be a big opportunity, whatever that looks like. I don't. We're figuring out what that vision is, as we go. And I'm so new to Miso that that I'm just still trying to figure out where the bathroom is. So it's but when I think about sort of the opportunity ahead of us, I look at that and I think, that's going to be something interesting to explore when the time's right.
Okay. Well, look, I want everybody who's watching and listening, stay tuned. I'm going to have Rich on when he starts doing his roll-up strategy, and he can talk about his successes and his many tombstones. And I really appreciate you coming today. Thank you very much. And to all the viewers and listeners, if you have any questions about what Rich said, if they're for Rich, I'll get them to him. If they're for me, I'll talk about them. You can, best thing to do is email me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. That's block and tackle show. The and is A-N-D. There's no ampersand. carl@blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks a lot for coming, Rich.
Thanks for having me, Carl. It's great to be here.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want more info on the show, please visit blockandtackleshow.com. And you can also email me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.